Hello, everybody, and welcome to Open Resource from the United States Digital Response. I'm Jennifer Polka. I'm a co-founder and advisor to U.S. Digital Response, and I'm one of your hosts today, along with Lauren Sue, who is the Director of Certification and Community for the wonderful What Works Cities initiative. Lauren, can you just give a hello so people know who you are?
Hi, everyone.
So Lauren and I are going to get out a great story today. But first of all, I wanted to say that we are streaming to you on Facebook or YouTube. So wherever you are on social media, we want you to be part of this. And you can ask questions in the comments section there. And our wonderful staff, including Laura Horak, are going to be pushing those questions to us. We feel free to put in a question at any time before we formally get to the Q&A session. We may be able to answer them while we're talking, or we may get them at the end. But thank you for spending a little bit of Friday with us, all of you who are watching. And thank you so much to the wonderful panel that we have here today. So Lauren and I have the job of drawing out a really remarkable story about how some amazing and determined public servants in Seattle, along with a handful of equally determined partners from all sorts of domains, have dramatically increased Seattle's testing capacity. And I am sorry for ruining the sort of suspense of the story, but I think it's best to start with the results of the project, which speak for themselves. So our panelists stood up a citywide COVID-19 testing in less than 3 weeks, processing over 1,500 tests a day with 5 to 10 minutes of wait time, doing 100 to 120 patients per hour, and these stats may need to be updated. I'm sure our panelists will correct us, with a 5-star average rating. Over half of the patients complete paperwork before arriving for their test, and 77% book ahead online. And Brian just told me when we were getting started that they have just passed the 100,000 test mark. So I feel like we should just start with a round of applause for this team. Way to go. So I assume you're all here for the same reason I am, which is I want to know how you guys did this. This is amazing. And I'm going to get started by just getting our panelists to sort of explain a little bit about how all this came together. We have a very diverse group here, only a few from the city. And then Lauren Sue from What Works Cities is going to draw on her expertise working with cities like Seattle to build on the data and analytic capabilities that came to play here. Then I'm going to draw out some of the lessons that I hope each of us can learn and use in our own contexts, both about what's possible in this particular moment in time, when we are in a unique moment in time, a significant crisis, but also about what's important and valuable capabilities and principles for this kind of work in any time. And then we're going to get to your questions. So again, please drop them in the comments section. In the interest of time, so we can get straight to this amazing story, I will introduce our panelists very briefly. First, we have Leah Tivoli, who is the Manager of Innovation and Performance, the City Budget Office in the City of Seattle. Leah, can you say hello so everyone knows who you are?
Hello.
Hi, Leah. Thanks.
Nice to meet everyone.
Thanks. Great to have you here. Next, Noah Hoffman is an assistant professor at the University of Washington School of Medicine and the head of the informatics division of the Department of Laboratory Medicine. Noah, can you say hi?
Hi, thanks for having us.
Thanks so much. And Brian Wallace. Brian, I know I've heard a little bit about what Brian does. Technically, he's the EMS training coordinator with the Seattle Fire Department, but he does a lot more than that, which you're about to find out. Brian, can you say hi?
Hello, everybody.
And we have Lauren Tien, who is a product analyst at Solv Health, which is a big part of the solution here. Lauren?
Hi, nice to meet everybody.
Thanks for being here. And last but not least, we have Jeanette Fong, who's a product manager, most recently with Lyft, but she's here in her capacity as a volunteer with United States Digital Response. And where are you? Oh, there you are.
Hi, all.
Hi, Jeanette. Thanks for being here, too. So glad to have you all. So let's get right to this amazing story. And I want to start with you, Leah. Kick us off. So where was Seattle on testing when you came into this? And why did the city feel the need to get involved in what's usually a county function? So set the stage for us.
Hey, everyone. So if you can imagine, roll back the clock to January, February, Seattle region was home to one of the first major outbreaks in the country. So we had a nursing home that ended up having an outbreak and 40 deaths that resulted. And that made coronavirus a very acute issue for our whole region right off the bat. And one of the things that we wanted to do right away as a state, as a county, as a city, is get testing going. And we worked, the state was working to move us in that direction. We were in crisis mode. There was problems getting supplies, PPE, and everything else you can imagine. And so moving into the stay-at-home order in May, we were expecting that at some point testing would start coming through the provider network. And so the expectation was that, across the state, we would start seeing testing come up. And oh yay, Julie Klein is here as well. So Julie, tell us a little bit more about how we then transitioned from this provider network concept to coming more into where we ended up in May. If Julie can hear me.
Sure. Hi, everyone. Hi. I'm Julie Klein from the mayor's office here in Seattle. And this really started with the mayor's primary concern about what was happening in the long-term care facilities, and the limited capacity that our public health office in Seattle and King County, the city shares with the county of public health office, of being able to go into the long-term care facilities. And as you can imagine, those folks are not exactly mobile, and not all of them have in-facility medical care. And so Chief Harold Scoggins of the fire department and myself were tasked with setting up essentially a mobile testing concept to send firefighters into the long-term care facilities to begin testing. And Lieutenant Wallace, who is on the line, was, I think, tasked with the operational aspect of that at the fire department. They proved all very quickly to be extremely skilled and capable at this. And so pretty soon that expanded to adult family homes. And then when we continued to see issues getting the number of tests per day in the city up to where it needed to be, based on the expert advice that we were getting from epidemiologists, from public health, and the metrics that were set out by our state governor, we realized that there needed to be supplementing of our private healthcare system and our clinic system that we had in the city to get anywhere near where we needed to be in the number of tests per day. So it was sort of a natural evolution then to have Lieutenant Wallace and his crew of now trained swabbers, and their partnership that they had set up through our EMS director, who also works with the University of Washington. And so they set up a great partnership, and it was sort of a natural evolution to set up mass testing sites. And there was a fire captain at the Seattle Fire Department that had the idea of turning old vehicle emission sites, which had just been decommissioned at the beginning of the year, into drive-through testing sites. And that's kind of how it was born. So
old vehicle emission testing. Interesting. Okay, so you've already brought Lieutenant Wallace into this. I understand, Lieutenant Wallace, that you were the first person to do a swab test.
Yeah. I was trained by a nurse at Harborview Medical Center so that we could set up our first responder testing back in March. And like Julie Klein said, basically this just evolved from testing first responders somewhere between 2 and 30 on any given day into mobile teams that then we realized could test, a team of 3 people could test between 100 and 120 people a day. And this is all doing manual virology requisitions and kind of a lot of paperwork on site. Then we realized that we had the workflow model that we could apply in some version to these community testing sites. So I think that just by virtue of learning to do that first swab, I just kind of got swept along where we are now.
And maybe, Noah, we can bring you in. And how did the university get involved?
Sure. Well, I think early in the process, Leah made a connection with the department and the laboratory. And by the time I came into the scene, the stage had already been set to put these pieces together with the fire department, with Solv Health, and with the University of Washington Clinical Laboratory. So we had been kind of scaling up our operations from the very beginning of the response. And actually, I had personally worked with Brian in a bunch of different contexts sort of early on as he rolled out first responder testing and then the other activities that Julia and Brian described. And so, we're the clinical laboratory for the University of Washington, and we run tests. And I think we were the natural choice to partner with the city as the sort of local largest reference lab, and we were super enthusiastic to contribute in that way.
That's great. So Leah, let me bring it back to you. So you've got these partners. You have now this mandate to no longer rely on the private entities here. Why did you reach out to USDR?
So I want to give full credit to Julie for pulling all the partners together. And the one element that the one gap that needed to be filled was that there was no front end registration system for our partnerships. So you can imagine we have fire department ready to do operations. They've built a lot of knowledge. You have University of Medicine, and they've been developing systems. I know we'll talk about some of his inventions that we were able to pull into the process. And then the only gap was how do you glue all this stuff together and make it a high throughput site? Brian and Julie had this insane goal of having something like 1,600 people, which we've far exceeded. But at the time, it seemed completely impossible that we would ever even get close to that. And the timeline was at that point when I got brought in 2 weeks. And so basically our team has a relationship with the United States Digital Response, and we reached out, and within an hour, we were already beginning to do research. We researched 20 different cities, at least across the nation. And we'll get to Jeanette in a second. And Jeanette got onboarded to the project to pull all of these ideas together into an actual product requirement list so that we could fulfill the business goals of the project. And also, she did a really amazing job. I just want to credit Jeanette with this, of really understanding what the minimum viable product would look like. What was the very bare bones thing that we needed to get this off the ground? And I think that was a theme for this project in general, which was what is the essence that we really, really need for every step of the way, and let everything else just be okay, and there's a lot of risk already with a project like this. Nobody's really done it before. You're not sure if you're going to get reimbursed. You're not sure if your insurance claims are going to go through. In fact, at the beginning, we weren't even sure if people were going to come because there had been kind of a narrative around people not wanting testing. And so we're what if we put in all this effort and all this money and nobody even comes to the test site? So it was a really interesting place to be. So maybe I'll kick it over to Jeanette because I think this is your part of the project.
Yeah, Jeanette, these folks are all in Seattle and you're here in San Francisco, right?
I am. I do love the city of Seattle, though. I used to live there. So as Leah mentioned, this is a very tight timeline. We were brought in. She contacted us on a Friday. Our team started researching right away. It was a Friday afternoon. Monday morning, we recognized the urgency. So Monday
Jeanette,
morning, we had pulled.
Can I just give people a little bit of context about why you were available for this? So you had been working at Lyft, and then you sort of jumped into this crisis response mode?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, during this crisis, there's a lot of us who just feel like this is the most important, supporting the government, supporting the reopening, supporting everyone who is hurting right now. This is the most important thing that we could be doing. And for many of us, we feel disconnected, as technologists. What can we do? And so I happen to know Raylene, who's also one of the founders. I raised my hand, and then I found myself getting to engage on such exciting projects like this, really impactful projects. And just going back to this particular project, on a Monday, we got to sit down with Leah, really get to understand the overall workflow. How does registration fit in with the entire workflow? What are the requirements? How is the data going to get passed around? And we knew this was urgent. There's a lot of people involved. We knew that we should not bother Leah that much. So what we did was we turned around and said, let's prototype what can be done with existing platforms, scheduling platforms. And on a Thursday, we were able to present our 2 finalists. It came down to, there's some trade-offs between the 2 finalist platforms, but at the end of the meeting, Leah was able to make credit to her. She was able to make some really decisive trade-offs, and we had a clear winner. I think you can all guess who that is, a Solv. So really the next step was putting everyone in touch with each other.
Maybe Lauren Chan, you want to take it from there. So then you got called in.
I did. Thank you, Jeanette. Yeah. So hi, everybody. I'm Lauren Tan. So Solv's core product, as you may have figured out by now, is a consumer-centric booking and scheduling solution for convenient care. So at the time of Seattle's need, we'd already been live in hundreds of clinics that were already doing COVID-19 testing. U.S. Digital Response, as you can tell, did a very strenuous vetting process with us and other scheduling solutions. And luckily, Jeanette and Leah thought that we were the best fit for City of Seattle, which obviously we're very excited about. So as far as my part of the project, I worked with Solv Health's head of strategic initiatives, Lauren DeVos, and we really spec'd out the product, the implementation, and the post-launch with the city. And then for me specifically, my job was to advise basically everyone in this chat how to best use our existing features at Solv. And then I also worked with our internal development team on building out a few strategic improvements for our product for this very special use case. So much credit to Jeanette and U.S. Digital Response for, I like to call it our Solv's love story with the city of Seattle, because it really is a relationship at this point.
Well, you all made it work. So I think you guys get so much credit there and making such a high touch engagement.
So remind folks, Lauren, you were called in at what point, and then at what point did it launch?
The timeline is getting fuzzy, but I believe we had 2 weeks from my first meeting with Leah to launch. So it was very fast. We had meetings every single day, and it really was a working relationship of, like they mentioned, the trade-offs and what we could implement and what we couldn't. So yeah, as far as the timeline, I believe we had 2 weeks to launch, but I think we got the best, as I mentioned, minimum viable product out. And even post-launch, we have continued these regular cadences to improve the product for both, Brian's team on the ground and for our patients that are looking for testing.
Great. I've got one more question before I kick it over to Lauren Stu to talk about some of the infrastructure that was in place and the data lessons to be learned. But so I already told you all what happened here. We have this system that's working and working well, and people are satisfied with it. And there's a really significant number of tests that are coming through it. Nothing works perfectly the first day. I mean, I've never seen anything that works perfectly the first day. So Brian, talk a little bit about how it was the first day.
Actually, the first day, I remember most of the staff was pretty elated that we did 205 tests. And I think I remember Julie and Leah also being kind of blown away by that. And I felt like we're not quite there yet. Like it was nice to start with a smaller number of people so that we could work some of the kinks out. But I will say the infrastructure challenges were just getting all of the staff in place. We were literally training people the morning of to use Solv on our tablets and to register people. We were training at that point firefighters to do that role because we hadn't yet identified who would do the work going forward. So we had a lot of fire department personnel on scene. We weren't training them to do the swabbing, that we were already well underway with, but it was definitely a challenge to get personnel up and running. We had all the PPE, we had the facility, the city departments came together really quickly under Julie's direction to get us all the supplies we needed. But staffing was the most intense initial challenge.
And you were training people that morning, and then were they actually working with customers that day?
Yeah, within 90 minutes of first laying eyes on Solv, which honestly speaks to how simple it is for us to work with on site. I mean, to really get efficient at it requires a lot of practice and some training so that people understand all the tricks, and we make sure that we make as few mistakes for Noah's team as possible. But the fundamental features of it were straightforward enough that we could do that training in an hour. I mean, the fire department's used to having to adapt to challenges like that on short notice. So, but I'm glad we don't do that every day anymore.
Well, you are in the emergency business, so you're very, very busy these days. I want to return to this issues of usability and just how all the pieces came together in a little bit. But I want to shift to Lauren now to talk a little bit with you, all of you, about how data came into play here and where you're going to go with all that. Lauren?
Great. Thanks, Jen. Thanks again, all panelists, for sharing your stories with us and for being with us today, and all that you're doing on a daily basis to make this happen on the ground. It's really heartening to hear that during these challenging times that government and partnerships can really come together to be fast, efficient, and responsive. It's not usually a narrative we get to tell, so it's exciting to share it out today. As Jen mentioned earlier, I'm with What Works Cities, and everyone in the audience to know we're a national initiative that works with cities across the country, helping them use data and evidence to solve and address their most pressing challenges. And I specifically oversee our certification program, which is really evaluating how well cities are managed by measuring the extent to which leadership is incorporating data and evidence into their decision making. And we are really lucky because we, for the past 2 years, have been able to work with Seattle and Leah's team. The city was actually one of our inaugural 9 cities to achieve certification. And just this year, they actually leveled up to achieve gold certification, meaning that, yay, meaning they're continuing to demonstrate excellence and invest in the right people and places and policies to put data and evidence at the center of decision-making for the city. And I wanted to share that actually because it's amazing to hear the 100,000 mark to me. So I think when we featured Seattle on their gold certification, not even 6 weeks ago, it was like under 20,000. So it's just been enormous, the amount of testing you've all been able to complete. And what we've seen from our certified cities these past few months in this wake of COVID is that this investment in data-driven practices and performance-based governance and innovation has really allowed these cities to be better positioned to respond swiftly to the COVID-19 in facing their communities. This project in Seattle really in particular demonstrates that it's possible for cities to be data-driven and innovative and human-centered at the same time. And in a crisis, you kind of really need that foundation in order for it to even occur. So with that in mind, I really wanted to check in with Leah and just ask, what is it about Seattle's data-driven and innovative culture that positioned you to be able to be successful on this venture and to really meet this challenge head on?
So as you know, Seattle has been growing in its data and performance since like 2016, where we started playing around with data and like, you know, how can we do monitoring more in a more automated fashion? And I have to say, like, all those lessons learned, you know, trying things out, trying to put together reports, like how do column headings work? How does the unique ID work? You know, these are things that us mere mortals never really get a chance to really play around with, you know, and until you're in a position of trying to like level up on your performance and your use of data. So I would say there was sort of like this like very technical element that we've been practicing for a number of times that helped me identify how the process is going to end up working. Like, I may not know every single detail, but at least I know like generally the flow and how, we're going to need to get the data to a certain point in order to then get it to Noah so that he can then do his lab orders and so that things can run smoothly. And, it's like, I don't want to say it's 100% perfect. We work on it every day, trying to make things right, trying to make the data quality better. And that's also part of good performance management, right? Is like continuously looking at your data, looking at the data quality, auditing it. And we have someone who's on the site named Sarah Smith, who does all the continuous improvement, all the workflow management, and has the information from Solv that she needs to be able to have visibility into what's going on the site. The other thing I want to credit is the Seattle Fire Department has a legacy of using data, right? Like when you're fighting fires, like seconds count in terms of, how much time does it take, excuse me, to get your clothes on, to get in the truck, to get to the, the scene, to like get it, like they're constantly calculating. And it was really, really exciting to see them apply that problem solving and what they would use for any kind of emergency situation to something like COVID testing. I just don't think we could have done this successfully with any other kind of partner. The other thing I want to point out about the fire department is the Chief Scoggins, is incredibly data-oriented leader. He carries around spreadsheets with him. He's constantly like pulling up these like really technical. He like loves having visualizations. He loves being able to demonstrate results and outcomes, and also the problems that he's seeing. So he sets like a data-driven culture for the fire department that is really unique to other city departments. So I feel like, in addition to everything you've heard, just the fire department's ability to use data and to do continuous improvement and workflow is really important. The last thing I'll mention is being patient-centered. So, when we set up the sites, one of the first things I did is I went and got tested to understand myself what it felt like to go get tested. And it was really freaky. Like, I've never had to go to I think I went to a parking garage where I was surrounded by people in Tyvek suits who asked me to swab myself. And that's a really uncomfortable thing to do. And so just all that experience helps you like empathize with who you're working with. And then on the flip side, when you go to the operations, right? So when we thought about how do we want this site to feel, and Jeanette and I were looking at different solutions, we thought, oh, this one is it's simple, it's easy to use, it's intuitive. And that creates a really nice front door when you're inviting people to come and get tested, right? Like you want things to feel really good. And then on the flip side with the operations, the fire department is incredibly patient-centric. Like one of the reasons why we have 5-star reviews, and one thing I'll talk about with Solv is that they have real-time feedback that's in the form of like tiny hearts that bubble up from the corner of the screen. And so everyone throughout the day is getting this positive energy from clients that are coming through. And that's been really helpful for them. But from like just a patient-centric perspective, you can see the love people have for firefighters. Mm-hmm. So LT, you can talk to the firefighter love. I mean, we read the reviews all the time just because they're so lovely.
The firefighter love is my favorite part, I think, about this entire process. Sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt you.
No, it's so good. I wanted validation on that point. So.
Yeah.
How did it express itself? Like people just like,
I mean, I don't want to embarrass Brian, but a feature that Solv has is real-time surveys. So after a patient who has, gone through the testing process, they get a text message to give feedback of their experience. We find that's really great to be human-centered and get that qualitative feedback, or else how else would you know what went well or what didn't go well in this testing experience? So that feedback is real time. It populates in the form of little hearts, and they all feed to a dashboard that Leah and Brian and Noah can see. And something that's been really funny is everyone on the Solv team also sees the reviews. And something very unique about this testing center in Seattle, run by the Seattle Fire Department, is that there's a lot of love for Seattle firefighters. It has become one of our favorite topics to read about at Solv. And it is really good to feel very validated that, this system is working and that people are having a really great experience when they do get testing.
I mean, I think part of that, all the jokes aside, is that our whole job is making people feel comfortable when they're having anxiety and when they feel like things aren't going to go well, for us to give them, even though we're trying to do this very quickly. I mean, I'm training people to try to keep these interactions limited to just 2 or 3 minutes, to still take as long as it takes, but to give that person like a few breaths, make sure they know that they're going to be okay at the end of it. And just to do that up front, to be very transparent about what we're going to do, and to make a few jokes with them as well, which Leah talks about a lot, is of just normalizing testing. In the beginning, we did this in these little sheltered places behind screens where nobody could see what was happening. And we thought for some reason that was important. And the further I've gotten into this, the more I realize we're just all standing out in the open, getting these swabs shoved deep into our heads. And that is just life right now. And it needs to be normal and okay. And I think firefighters are good at making that feel comfortable.
And from like a nerdy data standpoint, one of the things that we thought about at the beginning and let go of was any kind of integration with provider systems, right? So typically when you do a healthcare application or software, there's some integration with the provider network. And the current thinking on that is COVID tests are, if this continues going as it is, COVID tests are going to become as normal as taking like a diabetes test or any other kind of test. And so the need to make it like a patient visit, and doing it through this like particular, like through like a software like Epic or whatever, is becoming less and less important because, you may need to get tested over and over. And then I wanted to kick it over to Julie on the data side, because one of the things that she's been talking about that's really important is how we reduce the time it takes. And we're collecting between when people feel sick and when people actually get tested and get their results. And that's been something she's been promoting the entire time we've been working on this project together. And that, I think, is like the ultimate outcome.
It is, and it's only been underscored of late. I mean, the city of Seattle hasn't stopped talking to experts, all over the country and the world about, optimal time for testing. And we've from the data from other countries and from what we know from the United States and wonderful institutions like the University of Washington that are really looking at this and studying this is, it seems intuitive or like a no-brainer, but you really have to catch this, day 3, 4, 5, or it's almost pointless to do this sort of testing, because after you get the test, then it takes, naturally a certain number of hours, 24, 48 or longer to get the test results back. During that time, you're just simply relying on people to self-quarantine and to isolate. When they don't have that positive result, it's hard to be motivated to do that. And, in the meantime, they're having contact with other individuals. And so getting that time down and making sure that you're getting between the onset of symptoms or when you have a confirmed exposure to when you're able to actually go in and get swabbed, that needs to be, no later than day 4 or 5 for this to really work and for the mass testing to really do its job in curtailing the virus spread. So that's something that, I think we've done a pretty good job. So to some extent, you're relying on people to sign up as soon as they start feeling sick or as soon as they know they've been exposed. But everything after that, that's up to us to squish that time down as much as possible. So
that's great. And go ahead, Leah.
Oh, I was just going to call out UW Medicine because one of the reasons why Julie chose UW Med is that they have when we first started working with them, they had one of the fastest turnaround rates, and they still have one of the fastest turnaround rates in the region for getting their test results done. And not only is the lab really, really fast, but then the ability to notify is really fast. So I just wanted to turn over to Noah to talk about like how you do that, you know, with the QR code system you set up, for example.
Yeah, thanks, Leah. Yeah, so you know, with the booking system in place and the testing system in place, the big missing piece is how do you actually get results back to patients? And I think what Leah said, well, not patients, just people in the community. I think what Leah said about this system operating outside of sort of traditional healthcare is really important, because if you think about how you usually get your results back from the doctor, it's either you get a call from the physician's office, or you get something in the mail, or you look into a system that you have an account on, and none of those options were available. So one of the things that we had developed earlier in the response that we kind of had ready to go was this system where we provide the collection site with some barcoded labels, and one of the labels goes to the lab, and that provides a number identifying the specimen, and the other label goes to the person being tested, and on it is a URL and a QR code that you can scan, and it has a code on the label, and if you go to the site and you enter the code and you enter your date of birth, then you can get your result. And so the task that we had when we were putting all the pieces together is how do you get the number to the lab so that we can associate it with the result and post it online and get people their result as quickly as possible. And so we don't need to get into the details, but actually, I think within about the first half hour of talking about how we would integrate Solv, we identified basically a place to put the information, and we agreed on a process that would work in the collection sites. And I bought some USB scanners on Amazon, and we tried it out, and it actually kind of all fell into place. And that, for me, was one of the most gratifying parts of the process, because, I mean, this is literally someone in a lab running Avery label printers, label sheets through a laser printer and printing thousands and thousands of labels, and then couriering them down to the collection sites, and then you have thousands of people in the city walking around with your little labels, getting their results back. And so the opportunity to just sort of build something really from scratch that would support this process was a lot of fun. But I just wanted to add one other thing about kind of the secret of success, and we talked about it being data driven, but I think that the other dimension was that everybody in the group was perfectly aligned on the need to optimize every step of the process. And I think we really relied really heavily on everybody's intuition about what would work and what wouldn't work. And everybody had such a great feel for their component of the process that we really honed in very quickly on what was necessary, what we could cut out, what would make it streamlined and best for the people being tested. And so I think that that was really just having the key people, Brian and Leah and Lauren, all of whom I have spent many hours looking at little boxes on the screen, all just had such great instincts for what would work and what wouldn't, that it just sort of naturally fell into place.
That's great. Thank you so much for sharing that. And actually, I'm going to turn it back over to Jen, because I think we also wanted to be able to dig in a bit more with this dream team put together, talking about intuition and thinking about the human going through the process and development of the product and the testing. So Jen, back to you.
Yeah, no, thanks. I think it's very interesting to end a little section on data with intuition, which I think matters. And I think this story is such a great illustration of sort of like head and heart and, the alignment and when things really work. I also love, since like nobody has said the word procurement yet, that like Noah, you introduced that through like buying scanners on Amazon. This is such a like do what needs to be done kind of story. Do it fast. And I do think it speaks to sort of one of the things that we just see over and over again when things do work. Whether again it's in normal times where things can work, or when it's in a time of crisis. that you highlighted, which is just you have alignment around the goal. You had such clear alignment around the goal, and then you had this ability to make these decisions. And I'm imagining being someone who works for a city, watching this, hearing all of you talk and saying, I want it to work that way for me. We so often are in positions where we're trying to buy a piece of software, integrate it, get to an outcome in a government context where we have to be very driven and the process is very, very prescribed, and we have to check every single box. And I've heard each of you in your own words at one point say, we made trade-offs here. We had to make the right decision. We had to make it fast. I think I'll start with you, Jeanette, just like, Can you talk a little bit about how you knew the right trade-offs and how you were able to be confident to move forward quickly?
Yeah, so when we met with Leah, we had a clear set of requirements that all pertained to setting up this test site, and these actually multiple test sites. What we didn't need, by the way, were the full set of requirements of how to design for the end user. We know that. How to think about scalability. We know that. How to think about privacy and security. We have a good sense. Now, we had this, sort of a checklist, if you will, of requirements. And, to be honest, like no platform we found actually checked every single box. But because we understood from Leah what the entire workflow was supposed to be, what was that there's more than just this end user who's getting tested, but there are the people on the ground who need to check people in. There are the virologists who have to print out the labels and make sure the label got to the right place. That we took a step back and we said, okay, here's a platform, Solv. It doesn't check this one box, and the one box was it wasn't easy to make it available in other languages. Although, frankly, none of the platforms were very good at this. But it was head and shoulders above everyone else in terms of that check-in process. And we just knew just from talking to the team, how motivated they were to make it work. So we sort of like took a look at this and said, this feels right. We did present our sort of runner-up to Leah. She completely agreed. And I think it's a huge credit that she's able to think about, there is this hard requirement of how do we create the service that serves non-English speakers. And she knew that she could work around it. She knew she could come up with another solution that wouldn't rely on this particular piece of software.
Yeah, and I mean, that was kind of my learning from this project, was that the technology is like one important part, and it's kind of like the 80-20 rule. But one of the really important partners I brought in at that point, like literally at that point, is the Customer Service Bureau. And the Customer Service Bureau agreed to take phone calls. And they offer language support, and they offer other ways to, like, if you have trouble making an appointment, if you have trouble using like technology, they could help to some extent. Now, if you're really struggling with technology, this is not the right solution. Like, we have community health centers, we have mobile clinics, we have other opportunities to get testing, and our customer service bureaus understand that too. So I think that one of the really important takeaways from this is we decided we're going to do high throughput testing. In order to do high throughput testing, we had to make a few trade-offs and then find ways to, like, really human, easy ways to hand off like the pieces that wouldn't work within the environment we set up.
Leah, you had obviously a unique set of circumstances here. You can tell just by the way you're all talking that you had high trust between all of your partners, high motivation, a crisis to respond to. One more question before I hand it back to Lauren to take questions from the audience. So how do you keep that in, COVID's not going away tomorrow, but pretend for a second that, in the next quarter, everything returns to normal. How do we make those kinds of decisions with that kind of speed and confidence and ability to make trade-offs when we don't have all of those other conditions that you were able to draw on.
I think I want to pitch this one over to Julie, actually. So Julie set up this culture and the alignment of us all and like kind of said where we're able to go and empowered a lot of these decisions to be made. Julie, what do you think about that?
What's your secret?
So much of it has to do with luck and the big brains that we had in the city. But I guess what I saw my role as was just removing barriers for the people who were going to be working on the different aspects of this. So, once we figured out who all the players were going to be, we knew that the big missing piece, as Leah mentioned earlier, was this registration platform. We didn't have anything to do that. UW didn't have anything to do that because they were just a lab. And so we've got, Leah Tivoli, who this is like her lane, right? And it's not my lane. I know it's not my lane. Brian is a wonderful firefighter and an operations guy. That's not his lane either, right? So I think once you realize that you've identified the right person for those parts of the project, it is just about removing the barriers that are in front of them and helping them get what they need to do that part of the project. And that was what I saw my role as, is just removing barriers and getting everybody who is working on the different aspects of this project what they needed. So I think that's, yeah. And I think I've done an okay job of that, which is why, I think that is what keeps the trust going, right? Not letting the other team members down. So, and everybody involved in this project has pulled their weight and more. It's been pretty incredible.
It really is such a great story. And I think a lot of them have experienced that even during these times that are so trying. We feel like there's so much anxiety and so many bad things going on around us that it is causing people to come together and make, have that alignment and that trust. I know we felt that, we have felt that from the first days of USDR. We also just have everybody coming with their hearts full and absolutely everything they have to offer sort of on the table, like, take it, let's do it. I think I've also just experienced this feeling of like, let's make everything happen that way as we return to normal times. And a lot of people are calling that build back better. Just to name, more of the sort of things that have made this magical. When I hear you guys talking about like, it felt right, I think, and there's some questions about this in the chat that we'll get to. One of the things that felt right was that it was really designed for humans. And so often when we are stuck in a very prescribed procurement channel, there isn't a way to say, this is well designed, it works for people. It's just, it's hard to measure that. It's hard to make it part of the requirements list. When you have that alignment and you can sort of pump that to the top and say, we're going with this because people will be able to use it day one. We're going to get 250 people through on day one because it's easy to use. Then we're able to build on that experience. And that's my hope for all of this, is that we're able to build on it. We've got a lot of questions, and I'm going to hand it back to Lauren to take them.
Great. Thanks, Jen. So we do have a few questions here. I'm going to try to get through them. Excited to hear from the audience. We talked about this a lot throughout the panel in different ways about the different elements that involve the human nature of the human-centered piece of this work. But could you all just briefly highlight some of the details that really fall under human-centered design when it comes to approaching testing, developing testing sites, and thinking about the user in mind from start to finish?
Yeah, I can jump in from the Solv side because I mentioned that we are a consumer-centric booking and scheduling solution. So something that Solv always develops is empathy for patients, for consumers, for people seeking tests. And the data really helped us dive into that empathy, especially during these times. Online search volume for us showed that searches for COVID testing was 3 times higher in most cities than just for traditional urgent care testing. And that really narrowed it down for us that, like, there's a lot of tension. There's a lot of anxiety right now. Let's try to give some people some empowerment in this testing process. So as far as, the UI and the design of our booking page, from day one, it's been very seamless and user-friendly. We try to keep it to the essentials and try to keep it just very approachable for people. So this healthcare experience, especially getting tested during a pandemic, is not scary. It's very empathetic and very friendly. And we want to try to exhibit that kind of transparency and friendliness throughout the entire process.
Yeah, and as I mentioned, I did the, I guess in quotes, ethnographic research, you know, as you should when you start a project like this, understanding how it feels to be a patient and then really understanding how it feels to other people. And one of the things that we see a lot in our reviews now, which helps validate our design, is that people say it was fast, it was easy. I wish all healthcare was like this because it's like you're in and out. And so part of Brian's work, like making this really efficient and really, really fine-tuned, it feels like good care to people who go through the sites, you know, bringing a sense of humor. And then every single staff is actually trained up on being friendly. Everyone from who's doing the traffic, smiling, waving, making people feel better. And we'll see our staff's names like called out in the reviews from people saying, I felt so good. It was so great to see Andre, like, you know, or whatever firefighter. So yeah, and we continue looking and reading that qualitative information and making adjustments as necessary.
That's great. I've got another question from our audience here that's asking, was there anything unexpected or interesting insights that you might have learned about the constituents' needs in Seattle that you discovered through the process of testing? And that might be based on either kind of the process developed or the information learned as a result of the whole kit and caboodle here.
Well, I'm happy to volunteer that I think the most surprising and unexpected thing for me was the sheer volume of throughput that we were able to accomplish through the combination of the pre-registration platform, the UW Lab QR code development, and then the operational aspects that the fire department put into place. We are continually reaching new heights. We thought the max was going to be 800 a day at each of those locations. And I think Lieutenant Wallace, I don't know what your current record is, but last I heard, I think it was almost 1,600 at one site in one day. That is the most surprising part, is when you get parts that fit together so well and such competent, creative, and like hardworking people working in each of these parts, like that to me, it just every day I'm surprised and amazed at that. So
can I add something about the sort of understanding the needs of the community? So one of the pieces of information we collected through Solv was a reason for testing, and it's just a little free text box. And it turns out that we get so much insight about what's going on in the city from what people enter there. And so everybody remembers about 2 weeks after we went live, we had the protests in Seattle, and you could see the transition from people being mostly concerned about exposure to being mostly concerned about having gone to protests. And then later, when the positivity rate started going up a little bit, people were reporting more symptoms and more concern about exposure. And so I think, the lesson is you don't know what the need is at any given moment. And so basically just being as available and high volume as possible is the best approach for giving Seattle what it needs.
I wanted to throw in another question here that I think, Leah, you touched upon earlier, and that this solution is very tech-centered, so centered to the constituents in Seattle that are connected in that way. And so wanted to get some thoughts around how are you working on the excluded at most risk population when relying on an app? And how did the availability information get to those who are not connected in that way?
Yeah, that's a great question. Something we thought a lot about, as with any tech solution, you're always worried about who are you leaving behind, who might not be able to be part of the solution. So number one, anyone can come to the site and as a walk-up. Like it just means you'll register at the site. But if you have symptoms and known exposure, you're worried, you're sick, like Julie said earlier, we want you to get tested immediately. And so we have a process for accommodating people who walk up to the site. So if you don't have internet, you can do that. The other thing is we have worked really closely with our customer service bureau, which is a call center. So if you have a phone number, you can get in touch with the call center. And we have even just recently created ways to get your results through that mechanism as well. So, you know, it's not very many people that need that support, but for people who do, we want that to be an option. And it's something that we've really built into the design. So those are like two primary ways that we work through. So if anybody can come to the site. The other thing is, although we do collect insurance for reimbursement reasons, if you don't have insurance, you can still get tested, and there's ways to do that. Even if you're undocumented, that does not matter. Anybody can get tested. So those are some of the sort of race and social justice elements that we've included, and we're continuing to improve. As we continue proceeding further south, where there's more diversity in our community, we're beginning to think through more and more strategies for how to make testing available. You know, like we already have translated all of our materials into, I think, 7 different languages, but just continuing to think, how do you make inroads into different communities and working with our different community partners to do so. Just, you know, we need help, you know, and that's where what was so amazing about this project, it was a big collaboration and bringing in players that really have expertise in each area. And we hope to do the same with that as well.
And I'd just like to add to that we've discovered the minimum we need to test anybody is just a phone number. It doesn't even have to be theirs. If it's a person who's experiencing homelessness and they want to give us the phone number of a service center where they get help, or a relative or a friend, as long as we have some way to contact them if they're positive and they just show up with the phone number and a date of birth, that we're still going to give them a test, and UW Lab is still going to process it. And if they're positive, we're going to get a hold of them somehow. So we'll spend as much time on site as we need to with people to make sure that gets done.
Yeah, and just on the Solv side, we definitely are working to make our product more accessible. We are only a priority and initiative and need for working with the city is that we wanted to provide greater access to COVID-19 testing to the broadest population, and that includes non-English speakers or people without a cell phone. So I would say we always had these conversations in mind, but definitely partnering with a government has sped up the conversations of how can we make this more accessible? How can we be more inclusive in our product? So it really has given us, you know, a greater perspective of things and the people that we can reach with technology.
That's great. We are just about at the hour with a couple great questions left that we won't be able to answer live. One of them particularly about how you conducted your research. So for those who asked those questions or are listening, please reach out. We can connect you. Those are great, concrete questions that I'm sure will be very helpful for others too, and we'll get them out there. You can, I think, probably just info@usdigitalresponse.org. But without much time left, I'd like to, before I thank you guys, I just have to congratulate you again for this amazing work. I think that you can just feel in how you're talking about it, how proud you are and how much the citizens of Seattle appreciate it. And I think everyone here is leaving going, I want to do work as good as that and serve my constituents as well as this team has. So thank you for that. Thank you for all the lessons learned, and thank you for increasing testing in our whole country. I want to remind you all that if you work in state and local government and you want a Jeanette or someone like her, we have several thousand of them who just want to help. They're volunteers, they're free. We do a great job matching your needs with some skilled people. We've got people who are actually writing code, people are doing evaluations, people working on unemployment systems, testing, all over the map. Please reach out. You can go to usdigitalresponse.org and we'll find you somebody who will help. With that, Lauren, can you share a little bit about follow-up from What Works Cities?
Yeah, so if you are interested in learning more about your data practices, the strengths and weaknesses and opportunities for advancement, we offer an assessment you can take and be on the road just like Seattle to have a data-driven culture within your local government. You can go to our website, whatworkscities.org, or follow us at whatworkscities and get linked to the assessment and access to all of our resources. So we hope you reach out.
And if you want to send this video on to someone else, it'll be up really soon. You could receive announcements and invitations to future events. Follow USDR on Twitter, LinkedIn, or Facebook. And with that, again, thank you so much. Congratulations for all your amazing work. And thank you for joining us today.